Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is of Elsib-og-tuk First Nation in New Brunswick and is currently involved in filmmaking as a producer, director, and writer. His major concern is the survival of the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people and the preservation of their culture. For some years, he managed the aboriginal recording artists Eagle Feather. Most recently, he worked on the development and production of the APTN series Eastern Tide, and more recently, Wab-a-naa-gig. He has found that the practicing of traditional Native ceremonies has been a powerful, positive influence in his own life and is motivated to help share this practice and the teachings that go with it to other people. Aside from this, he is a devoted father, a community activist, a spiritual practitioner, and a crab and lobster fisherman in the Northumberland Strait of the Bay of Fundy. Welcome to the show, Brian Francis.
Good morning, Matt. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we kind of met through David and the Star Teachings community, and we've kind of gone a little bit back and forth, and I've learned a little bit about your work and what you're up to in the world. You've actually done quite a bit looking at your resume, and you're a little bit of a quiet person. You stay reserved, so I appreciate you coming on and sharing a little bit about your work and your views, because I think they're important. Do you want to give the audience just a little bit about a background on who you are and what you're up to?
Sure. My name is Brian Francis. That's what they call me. And I'm from a community in New Brunswick called Elsib-og-tuk. It's a First Nations community. We have about probably 3,000 people on our reserve. In Atlantic Canada, we have about 30,000 Mi'kmaq remaining in 30 different communities. And basically, that's where I'm from. I was born and raised here. I haven't really left. And a lot of our people are like that. We tend to stay where our roots are. And so that's basically who I am. I recently, I guess not recently now, I got into music production a few years back, and that really kept me busy for a while. And then when APTN came on board in I think it was 2000, it was sort of like a natural progression for me to go from producing music to producing television documentaries. And mostly, I guess 95% of my work is in the language and about our people. I kind of made it a mission to bring our stories to the world rather than having the world come to us. It was easier for us to bring it to the world with technology. And I try to share like positive stories about our elders, our artists, our craftspeople, our musicians, that type of thing. More like an anthology series about our people. And I find people really enjoy that.
Excellent. Well, you kind of, I think you downplayed it a little bit, because I was able to look at your filmography and all the things you've worked on. It's quite a bit. And so my question, I guess, is, we spoke a little bit at the beginning just about the preservation of the culture. And I've read a couple of your articles, and they're really important and they're really powerful. And I think that it's not common knowledge. All the people have an idea, that, okay, something happened. It probably wasn't great. But from your perspective, can you speak a little bit on why you feel like preserving the language is important? And it's a stupid question, but like the culture, like, how maybe that's a more important question. How do we preserve the culture and the language and the history? And what happened? Maybe you could speak about, everyone kind of knows, but from your perspective, what was kind of the timeline of what happened to kind of, let's say, just destroy it? There's no easy word for that.
Yeah. Well, I guess as a young person growing up, I really didn't realize what our elders and my father especially, what they were talking about. And growing up in our community and in our household anyway, our father always instilled in us about who we were and how important it was to know who we were. He talked about treaty rights. At that time, it was, I guess, we were referred to them as Indian rights. Now we say it's Aboriginal and treaty rights. And he talked about them every day at the supper table. And as a young person, you don't really grasp, I guess, what they're saying. But only later on in life did I realize what he was doing and what he was saying. And we look at the plight of our people here in Canada and in North America, I guess, the history that happened. And we begin to understand, and what he was telling us, he was basically giving us the information that we would need for the future. He'd always say, if there is ever an argument about the land, about who you are, about your rights, he'd always say, go back to the treaties. The treaties protect who we are, what we are. And so our rights never really came from the treaties. They were just, the treaties only protected them. Well, they were supposed to. The treaties were signed in the early 1700s. Basically, in the East Coast, they were what they referred to as peace and friendship treaties. So when the French arrived, I guess in 1604, they came for furs and fish, and they kind of came, I guess, in the spirit of friendship, I guess. And there was never I guess, a fight with the French. And they came ashore and they lived in harmony, I guess, after our people, the Wab-a-naa-gig people, helped them survive the first winters. So they still talk about it today. Like they really thank the Wab-a-naa-gig people for their help in helping them survive. Later on, the British arrived, and they had a dispute with the French, and I guess it was over the land and the resources. The thing that they assumed was that the French had already conquered the people that lived here, when in fact they didn't. They basically just asked if they could live here and live with us, and that's how it was. So when the British, basically, I guess, they, for lack of a better term, when they won against the French, they assumed that the land came with it. The Mi'kmaq and the Maliseet and the Passamaquoddy, Penobscot kind of had different understandings, I guess, because we had never fought for the land and we had never been conquered. We were basically treated. So they were saying, in exchange for peace and friendship, we will sign these treaties with you. And the native people said, basically, okay, but what we need is we need to maintain our way of life. We need to hunt and fish and gather the way we used to. We don't recognize borders, territorial borders. And that was the understanding that our people had. And later on, through legislation and history and what have you, they wanted to make it a bit more official. And when the provincial territories came about, they didn't know what to do with how to deal with the native people, because a couple hundred years prior to that, we were hunting and fishing and gathering. We were all along the rivers, which were our highways at the time, and 200 years later, we were still doing the same thing. So the provincial government was saying, well, we have to do something with all this land that the native people they're not using it. So, as my father was said, when he was young, he heard elders speaking of the time. So my father passed away in 2003, and he was 77 years old. So when he was 10, he would have heard stories from the elders that were alive when these government people came around the communities. They basically promised the native people that in exchange for the use of your land and your resources, we will collect a tax, and you will become the wealthiest landowners. So of course the native people agreed, and my father talked about him sitting in on a meeting when he was a young boy, and he heard elders speaking of a place in Ottawa where the Queen held monies for our people. And they were trying to devise a way to go to Ottawa and get some of this money, because they were, back then, like I'm talking about the 20s and 30s, our people were probably the most dire shape they've ever been. They were poor. They were living in bad conditions, and they were just basically starving, and they were dying, and the elders were trying to come up with these ways. And they went back to the treaties and said, well, the settlers owe us money. They said they were going to collect the monies on our behalf. And that struck me, because it was a visual picture for me. And still to this day, our people are still fighting for what's rightfully owed to our people, you know. So it's a long history. It's some of it is a very dark history, and but it's like I always say that the younger our leadership is, the further away they are from the history. So what was instilled in me as a young boy is not the same as what's instilled in somebody that's born, let's say 10, 15 years ago, for instance. For an example, in 2000 or 1999, we basically won in the Supreme Court of Canada the right to fish commercially, harvest seafood commercially. And so there was a big turmoil here. There was a big fight, because right now you had a group of people who are moving into an industry that's been being developed in the past 30, 40, 50 years. And now there's hardly any room for new fishermen. So the government had to do something. And what they did was they went to the communities and they had our people sign fishing agreements. Yet we won the court case based on the rights, the treaty rights. So basically what you have is a situation where the government says, well, we're going to put your treaty rights aside, and if you fish based on these agreements that we're going to draft up, we'll give you money to buy boats and get involved in the fishing industry in a more professional way. So a lot of our communities, well, most of our communities signed those agreements. So that's what happened was, so now, that was 1999, that was what, 20 years ago? Almost 30 years ago? 20 years ago. You have somebody that was born then who's fishing now, let's say they're 18, 19 years old. Their understanding is that they're fishing because the government gave us this agreement to be able to fish. When in fact, we're fishing because of a treaty right that was recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada. So you see how the information can be kind of minimized, I guess, or it becomes something else. So those are some of the things that my father had talked about. So now our people are still being charged. They're still being taken to court for fishing against the agreements. Yet it's the treaty right that supersedes the agreement. So you have this kind of situation where we're fighting in a system that doesn't even belong to us. It's foreign to us. A court system belongs to Canada. Yet the treaties were signed with the British Crown prior to Canada being in existence. So we have that. We're in that situation where we're kind of our lives are being legislated by a government that wasn't even here prior to the treaties.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you're saying a lot of stuff that is making me think about origins of things. I studied law and security when I went to college and looked up, maritime sea law. And I was just Googling when you were talking, like the origin of Canadian law. And I remember one of the concepts, and I wish I had my lawyer friend here to speak on it more eloquently. But the idea that like you've got legislation that goes and it says you can do these things, right? But then you've got like law of God or law of the universe or whatever. And so you come in and you find like an indigenous group and you have this, it's basically made up rules that they're not a part of, but you make them sign these things. And then what is this like entity or this, agreement? And plus you don't understand it too. Right. And even myself, like I remember studying all this stuff and looking at like, why am I paying so much in taxes? Where does this come from? Why is it a dishonest system? Which it is, to me, it's a very corrupt and dishonest system in general. That's just my personal view. Because there's, and it's run and it makes no sense. And, they legislate. And it's not for I forget how to categorize it, but you can't go and, murder your neighbor. That's square, that should be a law. But there's other things where they, will come in and add all these legislations, say you can, be in bed by 9 or whatever the case is. So, being a First Nations and you're just sitting there and this group of people come in, get you to sign all these things. And then the other thing is they don't honor them. It's like you make an agreement based on an understanding so there can be peace. And then it's continuous, dishonoring that agreement and then bringing you into, red tape and baloney and legislation. So you can't just, exist in a way that you, existed for, was it hundreds of years, thousands of years? I don't know. Thousands. Yeah. Peacefully. And the land was good. You know what I mean? And which is incredible. And so then, we're not even talking about what I see as this systematic destruction of a culture. It's a genocide that's happening still to this day. And you live through that. You wrote a couple articles on the public school system, which I have a big beef with the school system now as a white person, just as what I see being taught and taught to the kids and how massive an upgrade is it available. We're not even talking about how you go in. And this was some of my personal study was looking at why we still had war. And then that showed how people would conquer other cultures. And so you were one of those cultures, which is terrible. And I'm curious if you can speak on the public school system from your perspective or how that happened, how it unfolded from your view. And then if there's any way that you see for a reconciliation or a way for us to start to move forward, make amends, and start to build up and regain some of that lost history and culture.
Okay. We have to go back. Like I was saying, the plight of our people basically was determined by the laws, the made up laws, I guess, or the new laws of a new country or a new entity that basically came along. And it's kind of bizarre when you think about it, but basically our people hunted and lived. We were in the woods, we were by the waters, we did what we did for thousands of years, just like geese migrate south and whatever. That's what we did. We were the Mi'kmaq people of this area. So you had the new people who basically were trying to settle the country, the new land. It was prime prime area, and everybody wanted it. And then one day we come out of the woods, we would meet these government people, and they would say, this is your name now. This is your family name. Here is your number. This is a number that you have to go by. Of course, our people didn't understand what was going on. And as time progressed, there was more interaction, more, I guess, more. I don't know. I don't even know what the word to describe. But in 16, let's say in 16, sorry, in the 1600s, you still see me? In 1610, one of our earlier leaders was baptized, and basically that symbolized I guess, an acceptance to Christianity by our people. And after that, to me, basically the takeover progressed. And about 100 years later, the treaties were signed, and everything that the native people did had to be approved by the Minister of Indian Affairs at that time. Everything. We were placed on tracts of land that were basically lands that were not suitable, I guess, for anything else. Marshlands and just bad lands, I guess. And they set those aside as Indian reservations. So when our people started having concerns, they actually formalized, I guess, they formalized the way they were going to deal with our lands. And I think it was in 1844 when the provinces assumed control of crown lands. They basically said, we're going to lease your lands now to farmers who want tracts of lands to farm. Since you're not using it, we will lease these lands to them. They will pay a tax, and that money will be yours. And they actually called it. They actually developed what they called as an Indian fund. So whenever they leased tracts of lands after 1844, these farmers basically would pay their lease money, and it would go to the government, and the government would hold it for our people. After 2 years, nobody was paying into this Indian fund, so they did away with it. They eliminated the program, yet they kept the leases. So now you had basically, I guess the smoke. To me, I call it the smoking gun, because that's where they had made an agreement with our people, and they didn't honor it. But life went on, and basically our lives were regulated by this the minister and this Department of Indian Affairs. And in the late 1800s, they opened up schools on reservations. And a lot of our people, some people went, some people didn't go. It wasn't a big deal. But later on, in the early 1900s, there was basically a mission, I guess, for lack of a better term, that the government would fund what's known as residential schools. So the churches were already in our communities, so they would have basically government-funded church operated schools. And they literally came to our communities and scooped children from 4 years old, to anybody they saw on the street. If their parents didn't speak English, they would say that they were being raised they were being mistreated. So they literally took children from our homes, from our communities, and brought them to these residential schools, where some of them stayed from age 4 to age 17. And probably the worst things that could happen to a people happened in those schools. There's horror stories that about what happened, and about 15, 20 years ago, there was a settlement, what they refer to as the survivors of the residential schools, where they were given basically an amount of money for what they endured. The thing was that in order for them to receive this money, they had to sign documents that said that they were not allowed to speak of what happened to them. So to me, it was like shut up money sort of thing. And so they're trying to erase that part of our history. And right now there's very few of because the last one in Atlantic Canada, I think, shut down as recently as 1996. So we had these residential schools, but in the communities we had what they called Indian day schools. So basically it was the same kind of a school, but we got to go home at night. Whereas the residential school, they lived there. They were like it was like a dorm, and that's where the kids, and there was thousands of our people that went to these schools. So right now we have actually currently right now we have a court case. It's a lawsuit against the federal government and about the Indian residential Indian day schools, because some of the same abuses happened to a lot of our people in the schools within the community. So, but their mission was basically to civilize the Indian people, to remove all that is native and instill in them, or to groom them to become model citizens or Canadians, let's say. They beat the children for speaking the language. And it was interesting because I heard an elder say that the language is who you are as a people. So that's why they attacked it with such vigor, because they basically wanted to kill the people. If they killed the language, they would kill the people. So you have to think, when this mission was happening, they didn't think that we would still be here today to talk about these things. But when you look at the situation today, you're in our community, for instance, we probably have, if I said 50% of our people spoke the language, that would be generous, because it's been going downhill for the last 20 years. It's been like rapidly going down. Like another elder says that our languages are on skid row. So we're dying. We're basically dying. So in 25 years, you wouldn't have a young person that spoke the language. So to me, I would say, did they accomplish the mission on what they set out to do, right? We no longer pray in our language. We no longer sing in our language. Very few speak the language. And it was so vital, so important on who we were. And again, another elder that I spoke to says, when your children no longer dream in their language, your language is gone. Which struck me, we're so busy trying to survive that we don't see our death. You know, our people are literally dying, and in more ways than one, because the social conditions on our communities is so bad. You know, chronic alcohol and drug abuse. We have the highest rate of suicides. And to me, it leads to a cultural identity. We don't fit in outside the community, and we don't fit in inside because we don't know who we are. We don't know how to be Indian, let's say. And that's where the problem is. And I really can't. The only thing I can see is immersion, language immersion. If we introduce that within our schools, then the young people would have a grasp on the language. Right now they have what do you call those things? Language courses, but they talk about phrases, they talk about objects, words here and there. But if you're a speaker of the language, you understand the I guess the complexities, or it's a beautiful language. It lives as you speak the language. It's actually a living language. So you have to think, like myself. I think in my language, then I have to translate. That's why I have because Mi'kmaq is my first language. So, but somebody who, let's say, if I taught you, for instance, you come here and you speak, you can speak Mi'kmaq just as good as anybody else, but you wouldn't understand. You wouldn't understand where the words are coming from, the roots of the words, and there's combinations of how they interact with one another. Like just sometimes you add a little phrase at the end of somebody's. Let's say, for instance, for example, we'll use Elvis. When I talk about Elvis as a person who's alive, when we're speaking in the language, you'll know that he's alive. But when I say Elvis, right there tells you that that person that I'm referring to has passed on. So you have these little I don't know what to call those, but just how you speak the language is determines how you understand the language.
You said so much there that I want to touch on, and I think that you are sharing it in a way that I view as just really incredible. Your amount of I don't know, patience isn't the word, but like putting it softly, because I'm aware of what happened only to a degree, and it's brutal. It's absolutely disgusting. It's brutal. It's sinister. It's calculated. And because I was curious about that, I studied that, and I had a man on named Wab-a-naa-gig, and he's from Africa. He's a PhD. He's a psychologist. He's incredible. And again, he talked about the basic genocide of his culture when the Westerners came over and they're trying to help, right? And how do they help you? They help you in two ways. Number one, they help you with spirituality, because you're of the land. Obviously, you don't know God and spirituality and Jesus, so we're going to help you with that. And that's sarcasm for anybody who doesn't know that for sure. It's definitely sarcastic. You know what I mean? So they're going to help you with the church and a way to understand God. Then they're going to help you with language and destroy your culture. And he told me that when he was a kid, they were encouraged to speak like, the British news reporter. That was the cool way. If you're speaking, the way that you grew up and the way your parents and your grandparents, that was actually, it's like 1984 George Orwell. And then, there's a couple things I want to kind of say. Number one is like, because people have no idea what happened in the residential school systems. Can you share some of the things that happened in possible numbers? Like, and I know you probably didn't want to do that, but maybe even just a generalized so people kind of have an idea, because a lot of people have no idea what happened. They literally, this is going to be the first time they're hearing it, and they're going to think it's impossible. So please look it up, do your own research, figure it out on your own. And then the second thing is your language. Do you know how old it is? And maybe you can speak a little bit of it. And maybe when we're done, I'm already thinking about what can we do systematically to preserve the language, because I 100% agree the importance of preserving the language is paramount. And I think that coming up with a strategy to do that, I'm actively working and figuring out. David Lowenbear, who is a Mi'kmaq elder and someone that you've been studying with and listening to as well, he told me that your language is closer to dolphin than it is to English. And I thought that was a very interesting thing to say to me. So yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. Well, as far as numbers, when you look at the residential school system, the numbers are they're available online. I just know they're in the thousands. I've personally, one of my first documentaries that I did, I'm going back to your point a while back. I've I've actually done 70 over 70 half-hour documentaries on our people, and I have 2 feature-length films that I've produced and directed. So one of the first.
I normally don't stop people when they're going, but where can people access those anywhere?
Some of it is online. I don't know, maybe sometimes I'm too humble. Maybe I should have posted all my work online, or I never did that. I never I think I only have like maybe 13. The last season of the last series, they're available online under Wab-a-naa-gig TV. Yeah, so going back to my point, one of my first programs I did was I interviewed 3 survivors of the residential school, and they talked, and they shared, they opened, they were honest, and it was just so incredible what the information they shared. And I was working with a non-native producer at the time, a co-producer, and he said, "Brian," he said, "I want you to get me 7 or 8 people that are willing to share their experiences in residential schools." And I thought about it. I said, "Why do we need that many?" He said, "We're going to feature 3 of them." And I said, "Well, I don't feel right in doing that, because does that mean that the 4 that we're not going to use, their stories weren't gripping enough or terrible enough that we're not going to use them?" Anyway, I argued my point, and we interviewed 3, and we profiled 3, and those were the stories that we used. The problem we had was insurance, because of the business, I guess, the nature of the business. We needed insurance because these people were naming names of people that abuse them, so we wouldn't be insured. And I remember being kind of upset about it, because in a way it's that it's another way of keeping them quiet, keeping the truth from the people. We were fortunate enough that APTN, the broadcaster, insured the episode, and it was aired once. That was the extent of it. So basically, the system was successful in keeping the people quiet, keeping this part of history under wraps. Just like when they, just like their settlements. If you know, how can you put a value on that and then tell them, well, we'll give you this, and as long as you don't tell anybody about it, it's just not right. So so the other point was the language. Going back to residential school, I can only say that the worst that you can imagine happened to our people. It was bad, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody's child. Doesn't matter what your background is or who you are, or nobody should go through that. The other thing is that has to be looked at is what they refer to as the doctrine of discovery. I did some research on that, and I wanted to do a 4-part documentary on our people, and I called it The Original People. But one of the things I wanted to highlight was what's known as the doctrine of discovery. And to me, it's basically a license to kill. They use this to justify the invasion of countries, invasion of people. And if they stood in the way of progress, they were justified in killing these people. And I think that is I don't think that should exist, that document. And I'm not sure, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it stems from the church, I think. And that's how they justify taking over people's lands. And that's partly of how they came here, and what they did what they did because of that. So but going back to the language, it's a difficult predicament that we're in, because I've had a lot of people say, what can we do to help your language, help you keep that language? and it's I think it's sad. It's a sad thing to say, but I think it's too far gone. There's entire sectors of our language that we're not using. Like in the 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever, when we went hunting in the woods, we would know each tree, the name of each tree. We would know names of how a certain way the sun rises, or a certain way the sun shines, or what season it is, and all that. Those aren't used anymore, because our people don't hunt anymore. They don't hunt for survival like they used to. The tides, for instance, the water, how when the tide comes in, when the tide goes out, when the fish run, and all that. There was names for each sector and each event in nature, and now we don't know those. We speak in very general terms. For instance, when we go into the forest, we say Elsib-og-tuk. So when you say Nibuktuk, that's the forest. But when you're in the forest and you need to make a shelter. What, for instance, you want the alder, for instance, we call it dupsi, or a stone, or a midi. All these individual species of trees, we no longer use them, the names, because we're not in the woods anymore. We're not out on the water anymore. Basically, we're being sucked down the tube of progress, I guess, if I can call it that. But our people are just existing in a world that it's not ours. It's foreign to us. The language is foreign. The principles are foreign. Like, it's just, I don't know how, if we can recover from this.
Well, that's rough. It's not really ideal at all. The follow-up question I was curious about is, what are the biggest problems that the Native Americans in Canada or the U.S. face right now, and what does reconciliation mean to you, and what steps could we take to begin to recover at full steam? I remember the only comment I'll say is interviewing Clifford Mahooty, who's a Zuni elder, and speaking about it was the Indian Act in the school system as well, and what had happened, and he lived through that as well. And it's not that you're downplaying it, it's just that you're not giving all the gory details of how absolutely atrocious it was and is. And from my view of understanding systems and looking at the history in the way that I know how, which is not, I don't know if it's the best way, I just figured out some stuff. But I see that there's systems of this. It was a system of, taking people's culture. You look at the education system now and they say, Christopher Columbus discovered America. Did he? It's from one point of view, it's empowering to a whole group of people, and to another group it's like, what are you talking about? Like, how about we share and that's what the truth is, with a capital T, and I think that that goes so deep, and I think that the Native American culture and history, that we need to figure out what those truths are. And I'll just say that.
Well, that's a big topic, I guess. And I'm sure you've heard of the government's mandate of truth and reconciliation, which was based on a I don't know what they call that, but inquiry. And they came up with these 94 recommendations on how we can achieve truth and reconciliation. But it's truth and reconciliation based on their terms. Unless mainstream society is willing to accept the truth, then there can be no reconciliation. And you're also saying reconciliation because that means that we can fix, we can, I guess, coexist in a positive way. But I think what we have to do is we have to go back and begin to right some of those wrongs. And mainstream society has to accept the responsibility of some of those wrongs. I guess saying I'm sorry third hand doesn't really cut it. Going back to the treaties and the promises, I guess, of collecting the money for the native people so that they'd be well off. I think that's one of the things we have to address. Do we need to, I guess, does a payment fix things? I don't think so, because there's so much damage that's been done. A lot, I know in the early 60s, a lot of times the government would think that putting money into the Indian problem was going to solve things, but it only makes things worse. You know, like when you take something from a people and you take and take and take away from them, and then you offer something. Well, when you have nothing, you're going to accept something. You're going to accept anything, right? So I think that's where we were, and that's where we still are. We have so little. Our communities are in such dire conditions that our leadership, and we can't blame them, they're going to say, well, this is going to work for our people. Our people need this. Our people need housing. Our people need healthcare. Our people need education. Our people need businesses. This amount of money is going to help us do that. But you have to train people on how to accept that. We can't cut off, I guess, the remaining what's remaining of our people. Where the Aboriginal and treaty rights stem from is who we are. And for them to say, okay, we're going to make some new treaties and we're going to pay you, I don't know what amount, exorbitant amount of money so that your communities will flourish. We can't do that. Like, our souls are not for sale. You know, our homeland is not for sale. When for example, for instance, if the French were losing their language and their culture, they can always go back to France and relearn it and bring it back. But when we, as the original people of this homeland, our homeland, when we lose our culture, when we lose our prayers, when we lose our language, where do we go? We have no place to go because we're here. This is where we're from. This is our homeland. The language we speak is the language of our mother and their mother and like we said, thousands and thousands of years. When I speak the language, I know that the language that I'm using are the same words that my ancestors used 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and that's so important. That and for me to see that it's on the verge of dying, it's just a sad situation. You know, what can we do? What can our children do? Because that language was instilled in me. That's why it's strong. But the next generation, if they learn it, if it's not inherent in them, then it makes it not so strong. You know what I mean? So we're just I don't know where we can go from here or what we can do.
Yeah, Yeah, it's really disheartening to hear that. And again, speaking with Clifford Mahooty, it was the same idea where he was talking about when he was a kid. He's just like, when you're a kid and your grandpa's sitting you down and telling you stories. He's like, I just wanted to go out and play, and he'd get mad at me. and and he's like, I understand that now, because I try to sit down my grandkids and they just want to go play, and I get mad at them. And but now we're at this point where it's almost like the last generation holding that language where you've actually embodied it. You're teaching it firsthand from the original source, or from, a place where right now, you look at the English language, and it's a silly analogy, but like you've got everything shortened, like LOL and all the stupid memes and how kids communicate. The language is different here. So I can't imagine what would happen there, really losing it from the original source, and how important that is. And when you speak about losing your prayers, your spiritual connection, I think that is extremely disheartening as well. And dreaming in another language, it's so fascinating to hear that, because there's something I don't know, primal's not the word, but just like to the core essence of how important that is. And you come in, and you conquer, which is what their job was. Not their job, their intention was. You said at the beginning where the French were there, and they originally came, and you helped them survive. And you're looking at this new culture, and you think, okay, like they're here, they probably shouldn't die. Let's help them out. Then another group comes and it's like, oh, you didn't take their land, you take their stuff. Obviously, you take their stuff. So then you conquer the French because they're dumb, because they didn't take their stuff, right? And then, oh, there we go. Now let's hoard all this stuff. Now we've got the British Empire, and then they basically run Canada through these pieces of paper and legislations that require me to go to a government building to do all kinds of crap, which is ridiculous and way too far. And it's, again, I'm not going to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but it's dishonest. And, you look at your culture, and basically it's the old analogy of teach a man to fish and you have a life. And so it's like, what we're going to do? We're going to do the complete opposite of that. We're going to make sure that they already know how to live, how to exist, how to thrive. Let's systematically disseminate that, have them forget their history, including the language, which if you came over, you wouldn't think would be possible unless you orchestrated it in a very intelligent manner to be able to dismantle that. You would have to do that. And so now that this is the result of that, and what do we do, and how do we, if there's a way to, preserve this, and I think that it's our responsibility, anybody hearing this, whoever you are, to just, I don't know, educate yourself and maybe think about it a little bit, because I think that the information that you guys hold and have in your histories, from what I've learned from David, what I've learned from Clifford Mahooty, what I've learned from the Mayan elder, just old knowledge. And David and I went to the Parliament of World Religions, 212 distinct religious faiths. The oldest one, I think, is 2300. Is it Zoroastrian is one of the older ones, and like Hinduism is pretty old. So maybe somebody out there can write that out. I Googled it once and I forget, but those are two of the oldest ones. Your history crushes that by like 18,000 years. And so what happens when you're living on the earth and then all of a sudden people exist and say, oh, you know what, actually it's this God out here. That's the one you need to worship, and we're going to conquer Africa, North America. Oh, we've got some savages here. Let's conquer them and bring in churches and all this stuff. What you're bringing in is like basically the Roman Empire. And if you're, it's hard because like I know really amazing Christians. I know really amazing people of different faiths, Muslims, and I like them. They're good people. But I'm also curious about, where did those religions come from? What do those religions stand for? How does it improve your quality of life and connection to spirit? And if we're talking about God, where it's like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, whoever, like you could say ascended master. You could also say, when you're talking about God, it could be like, the Lucky Charms guy or Santa Claus or whatever, because nobody has seen him physically. They'll talk about the spirit of nature and force, and I understand that. But when you put rules and regulations down on a piece of paper that I have to follow to connect with this thing, I think it gets a little bit murky. And from what I've learned from David and a few others, it's, when you're living in the land, the closest I've ever been to God personally is always when I'm in nature. It's when I'm in nature, when I'm connected with myself and my environment. And, it's all life, it's all things. And so I don't need to do a certain protocol to connect to that thing. So that's quite a rant there. What I wanted to ask is, you can either speak about anything that I just said, or, you know, what is your view on spirituality and like the role of religion compared to, you know, Native American core values?
Well, I was raised Roman Catholic because that's what was in our community. There's a church in almost every Native community in our region. And as a young man, I didn't like going to church, but I was forced to go to church because we had to. It was only after I started understanding who I was as a Mi'kmaq person, and it was only after I attended my first sweat lodge ceremony. And surprisingly, I was like probably 27 years old when I first entered a sweat lodge. And as corny as it may be, it was as if somebody switched on that proverbial light. Even though I was in the dark, I saw this is what I've been missing. This is what my life's been missing. This is who I am. And since that time, I've been following these ways for about 26, 27 years. Now when I go to a church, I know how to pray. So it's not as bad as it was when I was younger, because I didn't know how to pray. Now I understand prayer, what it is. I can pray here, I can pray outside, I can pray anywhere. And the same reasons that you are comfortable outside with the elements, you're connecting to who you are. Man makes a mistake of trying to remove himself from nature when we're only a part of it. So it's when we're connected to all of creation. See, that's spirituality. Everything has a spirit. When we enter into a sweat lodge, and the grandfathers, the rocks, are seen as elders, and they go in before us because those rocks have been here longer than any of us. They know what they're wise. They know everything that's been going on. So we honor that, we respect that. To a person who doesn't follow these ways, they would say they're just rocks, you know. But it's so much more. Our very being, our connectedness, I think, that's where we have a hard time to understand people like David, for instance. People have a hard time to grasp what he's saying. But it makes so much sense when you begin to understand, when you listen, I guess. And he'll be the first one to say, don't listen to me. Listen to yourself. You know, the healing, you're the teacher, you're the one that knows, because we're all connected in that way. I recently came from London with the start teaching people, and it really opened my eyes, because the UK, I guess the British, are the ones that we signed the treaties with. And I asked around, and nobody knows anything about the Mi'kmaq people. Nobody knows anything about the treaties that were signed in 1725 to 1767. So that tells me, you know, when to me those treaties are our survival, that's our salvation. And when the people that we signed the treaties, the signatories of the treaties, don't even know anything about us, we have a tough battle ahead of us, because they're the ones that we're supposed to be responsible for us, our livelihood, our well-being. They made an agreement with our people, and they don't even know anything about us. You know, so how do we protect that? How do we make sure that they live up to the promises that were made to our people? Because we're going to lose everything. We're going to lose our very existence if those things are not honored, if those things are not recognized. And our spirituality was part of that. It went along with that. It's who we are. Our language is who we are. We say in our language, when we say "Nklisudi," it means my voice. It doesn't mean language. It means the words that I speak. Wilnu is the tongue of your mother, and those are the things that we're going to lose if something is not done. You know, our leadership is part of that foreign system that was imposed upon us. It has nothing traditional. It has nothing spiritual in there. It's basically the same form of government as the city of Moncton has, for instance. It has I was going to say a chief and council, but it has a mayor and a council. And that's the same system we have within our communities. Only thing is we call our mayor the chief. But there's nothing traditional. There's nothing spiritual in that organization. The true leadership is with people like David, people like Clifford, people like my brother-in-law here is William Nevins, who is the Sundance leader here. He's our spiritual elder. To me, those are the warriors that we need to bring to save our people. And it's an uphill battle. You know, we first we need to recover that. We need to find those connections to the stars or to the stones or to the trees or to whatever. It's who we were, and it's how we prayed, that we need to recover that in order for us to pass that on and strengthen our young people to be able to protect the next 7 generations.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And you kind of ended on one thing that was interesting, saying to you say protect the next 7 generations. That's a common thing, right? To think 7 generations down the line, not just for yourself. Where does that come from?
It's an inherent teaching, I guess. We tend to think for now, but if our people thought that way, then they wouldn't have signed the treaties 350 years ago. They knew that those treaties would protect the people living now. So we can't let that end now. So we still have to protect the children that are not born yet. We don't have a right to sign away their homeland or their rights that they have that come from the Creator. We don't have any right to sign that away. The bureaucrats assume they have that right, and but it's wrong. It's illegal. To me, anything other than the treaties that were signed, they're illegal because they have no jurisdiction to sign those. The treaties were signed with the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet, Passamaquoddy, Penobscot as nations, because treaties can only be signed between 2 nations. Anything after that, it's just paper. They're just agreements. And they really don't hold any water if you go back to the treaties and say, well, this is the jurisdiction that I fall under. Even the Supreme Court of Canada, there was no Canada back then. So why are you bringing my treaty rights into a court system that isn't even mine? I shouldn't even be in that court. Yet they do. And there are people that are going to court every day, you know?
Yeah, and that gets into a huge bag of worms that I would love to have a proper lawyer on, because it is seem like a legal operation. How do they bring that in? I remember researching law, and when I was doing law and security in college, they would talk about well, I learned about your birth certificate as just a Canadian citizen, and even as like the same protocol as a shipping container receipt, where that's how they can, Matt as the identity, not as like the sovereign being, because it's a bit ludicrous. Like if you look at like a bird or a duck or a moose, you can't tax it. It's operating on natural law. And so what is the difference between natural law and maritime sea law, I think it is, and the actual difference in how they can somehow through bureaucracy and legislation get you to agree to these things. And it seems to be agreements of like, oh, okay, I'm going to sign this. But then even if you don't, they use coercive tactics. It's like, oh, well, this is the thing that we need to make it legit. Okay, cool. Most people are signing it, but not everybody. Here's some coercive tactics, or let's pay them off, or whatever the strategy is to make it quote unquote legal in this system that's literally fabricated by a group of people. And I remember learning one thing about law is saying like sometimes, the reason why you need a lawyer is because they make it so freaking confusing. One word that you think will mean one thing means something else. So if law were about justice and freedom, it would make perfect logical sense. It's like, okay, so we're at court and you came over to this guy's house and you stole all of his stuff. That's, you probably shouldn't do that. Might want to give it back. But even a culture where you're completely sovereign individually through the community and and everywhere around. And what happens is when people are trying to take stuff from you, that's when you need legislation, because it's unfair. People have a moral code, and it's getting disintegrated through baloney and people trying to conquer other people. Which is basically the entire human history as far as I know. And we're still in the middle of it today. Do you want to comment on any of that? I know I was just ranting.
Well, it's a complex situation, and it's like a different world. I see it as a different world, and we sort of have to live in both worlds. When the treaties were signed, it came with these wampum symbols, where there was two parallel lines. And the analogy, I guess, behind that was that they would live in their world and we would live in our world, and those two worlds will never intersect. So basically, we were operating under freedom. And now we basically have to go in their world for us to survive, because otherwise we wouldn't have anything. And the legal standpoint is it's hard for anybody to comprehend, because it's the justification. In order for the legal system, for let's say the lawyers to understand, they can't, because then they have to leave their world to listen to our argument, and that throws everything out the window, because they go by what they refer to as case law. So almost every situation with a Native person that takes it to court almost has to be precedent, because everything that we're arguing, somebody might have said that in 1949 or whatever, and it's case law, and they have to go by that. Well, it's not the same situation. So again, we're being guided by written things. It's so far removed from the natural law that it just makes it impossible. The reason why Canada is an entity, the reason why the legal system is an entity, they're corporations that don't have heart, they don't have conscience, they don't have feelings, and that's the only way they can do what they do. Otherwise, a human being can't do that. So we have a situation where you have people that are natural, that go by natural law, trying to fight a system where it's not human. It's not possible for those two worlds to interact with one another, let alone understand each other. So it's and that doesn't only apply to Native people, it applies to everybody. We're being directed. You know, it's society. When you look at society, we see people in the city. People are rushing, going. Where are they going? You know, they don't even have time for themselves, let alone raise their families, let alone interact with their children, let alone go out in a park and I don't know, feel the grass on their feet. You know, we're disconnected from spirituality, and that should be the reason why we exist. Our people never did anything without spirituality. They always had ceremony before everything. You know, marriages, social gatherings, weddings, even war. They had a ceremony before embarking on anything, and that's connecting with spirituality. That's connecting with your past. You know, and we've all lost that.
Yeah, I agree. And I really like, I think you made two really important points saying, like, you know, the wampum line thing is a very fascinating piece of information, having two different worlds. And that's the understanding, is that you're going to live in your world in your way of life, and you're going to allow them to live in their world and their way of life. And, you know, we do not require meeting that. And all of a sudden, over time, probably the conquerors, because if you're conquering nations, you learn how to do this. They're thinking 3-4 generations. And now that I'm older, I'm like, oh my goodness, you know, it's actually not that hard to change and conquer a whole entire culture. Well, it is, and it isn't though, because then you could take like education. And there's this Aristotle quote that I've been referencing quite a bit. And it says, you know, where is it? I'm going to find it here. Give me a child until he is 7 and I will show you the man. And that's because when you educate children, it's very hard to change that programming from that age. And that's essentially why you fund schools and education, then religion. You have to give them some sort of higher power and spiritual belief. And then bam, you got them. And that's where, if you look up the Council of Nicaea, and that's the origins of the Bible, and that's the Roman Empire figuring out how to conquer, you know, different groups of people at that time, because they had different spiritual beliefs, and you need to combine them. And that's where it came from. And that's, you know, that's not even disputable. I haven't seen any information out there where they said, no, that's not real. Like, no, we agree on that. That's actually what happened. So you can look that up, and it's really important information. And then I think that you said another really important thing, and this is something that I feel is like, you know, we're living in a very unnatural way of life. And what we're competing with is this entity that doesn't have a heart or soul or spirit. It's imaginary, created by, it's just all of this imaginary stuff and agreement, you know. And I was like, I never signed up for this. This doesn't, you know, align with my morality. This is off, you know. And you're forced to play that game to live in society. And where is that coming from? And what's the agenda of this entity that has no heart, that has no spirit, that's literally this corporation? And through legislation and bureaucracy and basic baloney, we're forced as a people to you know, play in it, even as a white person. And even, you know, more so for you, it would be even more extreme.
So yeah, that's where we are.
that's where we are. Oh my goodness. Well, Brian, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing. I know that you like to stay quiet, and you've done some incredible work. I think you've shared a lot of amazing things and amazing insights. And I invite people to just, you know, look deeper into some of these concepts, and open up your eyes a little bit, open up your hearts a little bit, and just, just ponder some of the ideas you may have heard today. And I want to ask you, you know, you can feel free to elaborate as long as you wish. Is there anything that you wish that I had asked you, or is there anything that you want to talk about? And if there is, feel free to, you know, go on as long as you like.
Well, it's a lot of times I myself personally, I feel alone, because there's very few people that I come across that share these things. We have our warriors, we have our you know, bursts of Indian pride when we stand up and rise against pipelines, against resource extraction, against pollution or whatever. that's fine. We need to do that as our role in saving Mother Earth. But if we don't save ourselves, then that's gone anyway. You know, so we have to save ourselves first. We have to strengthen ourselves. And like my father always said, before you go out to fight, try to understand what you're fighting. You know, so if we're fighting resource extraction, we have to understand the politics behind that. The people that are extracting the resources, they're not doing it just for fun. They're doing it for money. So, but where is the money coming from? Where is the permission coming from for them to do that? The licensing and all that. It stems from the politics. So now you have to understand the politics behind all these things that you're fighting for. We just can't say, no, you can't do that, you know, and we can't fight the people that are doing it because they're only doing their job. So we have to go further than that. Now you're into the politics. Now you're into the politicians. Now you're into legislation. Now you're into policy. You have to understand all that stuff. So that's where the changes have to begin. You know, so all I see is our people being criminalized by trying to fight, by trying to protect what needs to be protected. But you can't fight that fight if you're behind bars, and that's what the system does. It makes you criminals when you're trying to protect what's yours. And we're not only trying to protect it for us, we're trying to protect it for everybody, because we all have a role in you know, we're at the end of the day, we're all going to the same place. You know, it doesn't matter if you're a millionaire or if you're a person on the street. We're all going to end up in the same place. So I think we need to try to bring those worlds a little bit closer together and try to understand, you know, foster an understanding of humanness, I guess, and just sharing and caring and trying to understand your fellow man. Doesn't matter who it is. I think that's important. And Dave's mission about trying to reach those 7 million lights, I always say, you know, it's when you look at it, it's so almost like an impossible task. And I commend David so much for him trying. You know, he's fighting a big battle, but he can't do it without all of us. You know, if we can bring that light to 10, 12, 15 people, if we all did that, then that 7 million isn't too far off. You know, isn't that hard to achieve? So I think that's all we can do for now, is that begin with ourselves and try to make your life better. Try to live a good life, and then share it, and then spread that, and then hopefully the next person sees it, and then eventually it'll filter down to the children who may become politicians of the future, and then they may see what's wrong with the system.
Awesome. Really, really well put. Really beautiful words. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for everything that you shared. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And where can people find more about you? Maybe watch some of those videos that you made, and just kind of, if they want to educate themselves, where should they go?
Yeah, I guess like I said, Wab-a-naa-gig TV will bring you to some of my shows. I really there's not really much about me, really. I'm just me. So if you can get a hold of me, like, find me, and if you want to talk to me, whatever, I guess social media is the best place.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on and all your work, and I'm definitely going to check out a few of those documentaries myself. So thanks for coming on, and thanks for sharing.
Thank you, Matt. Take care.
My pleasure. See
Good
you
luck
guys.
with the debate.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.